So let's advance the valve to the next step. We can come back to some of those other, talk about some of the other things in a little bit. Get to rinse. We draw. Now, one thing also to consider, brine and rinse happens for 60 minutes long, about an hour. In the first 20 minutes, about the first third of brine and rinse, you want to empty your brine tank. In the first third, your brine tank should be empty, regardless of what size it is. If it's a 1 cubic foot softener, that's what, 7844? If it's a 1 cubic foot softener, if it's a 10 cubic foot 2472. In the first third of the brine and rinse, you need to empty your brine tank. And the reason is, for the remainder of that time, is your rinse time where you're going to be pushing down your brine through your bed. Ideally, by the end of that hour, you should have just about evacuated all the brine out of the tank. Some things that can lead to that not happening. If we have a brine tank that's overfull, it will take longer to pull in the brine than a first third. It might take the half, it might take 2/3, and we won't have enough time to push the brine all the way through. We will have brine left over when the valve goes to service. Another reason that we might not pull all of our brine out in the first third is we might have an injector that's not creating good, strong draw. Might be a plugged up screen. Another one is we need appropriate pressure on our injector to create good draw. If you have a backwash, if you have a carbon filter in front of a softener, or if you have some sort of a filter that's in front of the softener and it hasn't backwashed for a while and now it's causing a big pressure drop, if you don't have good pressure on your injector, it doesn't create a good draw and it takes longer to draw the brine than the first third. A good clue that that's happening, at any time you ever get regenerant left in the service water, that's the cause of it. If there's brine water left that goes to the service line, what you have is an issue with rinse not being long enough to push the brine through the bed. So let's go to rinse. So that lasts for 60 minutes. The next step is what we call rapid rinse, or forward rinse, or fast rinse. That rinse, primary purpose of that rinse is to compress the bed back down and get it ready for service again. So that's what that 10 minutes is there for. It gets the bed compressed, compacted, so that when we go back to service, there's no place for water to sneak through and to bleed through any of the contaminants. So for 10 minutes, we flush forward, it pushes the bed down, and we get ready for service. Now, because that service flow is the same direction as, or that rinse flow is the same direction as service flow, your expectation at your drain should be soft water or filtered water. It's a good troubleshooting a good place to go troubleshooting, to go to rapid rinse, to go to your drain and do a test at the drain right there. Let it run for a minute or two and then do a test at the drain to make sure you've got zero soft water. Because if there's a problem in your product water where it might be a little bit of leakage, 1-2 grains of leakage at your product water, and you just can't seem to find where the issue is. Valve's going through the steps of doing what it's supposed to be doing. You can put it to rinse and do a test at the drain. If you've got zero soft water at the drain, then there's a leak somewhere in your plumbing. There's a ball valve, there's something that's leaking a little bit of hard water into your supply line. And the valve is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, if it's 2 grains at the drain, the same as it is at the product, then you know it's something in the valve that's leaking. Something here. So that's a good way to separate whether I look at the valve or if I look at my plumbing to find out where my leakage is happening. Rapid rinse, and we go to brine tank fill. The pistons move forward. A good thing to know is that once this valve goes to brine tank fill, it is serving water. When the piston's in the fill position, any inlet water will go down through the tank and be treated on the outlet. So this valve will be flowing soft water at this point. It is also taking part of the inlet water and putting it into the brine tank. And that inlet water, now because the piston is far enough forward, water is flushing up both sides of the injector. There's no vacuum because it's up both sides, and it's going to the brine valve. The brine valve's open, water flows through a flow control. That flow control shuttles back and forth. The way that you can tell what size flow control is in the brine valve, there's a label or an indication on the brine valve that'll tell you what the flow rate is. The number of minutes that we set for brine tank fill, combined with that flow rate, is how much water we're putting into the brine tank. Every gallon of water dissolves 3 pounds of salt. However many gallons of water is what we're going to determine, is what will dissolve the salt and determine how much salt we're going to dose back into the bed when we go to regenerate our softener bed. So again, it's just a two-way valve. When it's open, water flows out or it's vacuum, and when it's closed, we shouldn't have any flow. Sometimes, if this flow button gets obstructed, gets plugged, or if something happens where we're not flowing water into our brine tank, you're not going to put enough water into your brine tank. And when you don't put enough water into your brine tank, you're going to short dose, and when you short dose, you're going to get leakage at the end of your run. You'll have a softener. It'll be zero soft when it first comes online, but before it goes for, if it's supposed to treat 2,000 gallons, it might treat 1,500, 1,200, and then it runs into hard water. That would be an indication that first thing you'd want to check is to make sure that you're making enough brine to dose your bed with. Separate time fill, the last step is the 2 steps. The only reason for the 2 steps is to jump off the brine valve and end brine tank fill. That's the only reason that those 2 pins are there. After that, we jump off the 2 pins, and then we cycle all the way back to service again. Now, with the electromechanical controls, all of our program wheels count up to 164 minutes. Even though the valve is serving water, and it's online, and it's come out of a regen cycle, it still needs to take all this time to get back to service again. With time clock valves, that's not necessarily a critical situation because we're not counting volume anyway. But with a time clock valve, or with a metered unit and a time clock valve, when I jump off of there, it's not going to begin counting gallons again until it gets all the way back to home. So that's something to keep in mind, is that if water's flowing through that unit, it's not going to count it through a meter until it gets back to home. A way to get around that is you can shift your program to the back of the program wheel. That way when it goes in, it'll come out of home and start going towards backwash, but it won't get to backwash until it hits the pins. And then when it's done, if your program is shifted back, it'll fall right into home and you start counting gallons again right after the regen step. So that's a way, if you're concerned about all of this time at the end of the regen and accommodating for it. Otherwise, you're going to have to build in a reserve. The digital controls don't suffer from that particular issue because the digital controls step the piston through from one step to the other immediately upon initiation. The way that you can manually initiate a regeneration is just by holding the regen button down for 5 seconds. If you're troubleshooting, you can step it from step to step by just holding the regen button down for about 5-6 seconds. It'll give you what cycle you're in, cycle 1, backwash, and it'll count down the time. To go to the next step, all you have to do is hit the button and release, and it'll tell you what step you're going to. Brine and slow rinse. It counts down from an hour. You can go and step from point to point by just using and initiate the cycle button. This one does not have an extended time at the end. As soon as it's done, it goes right away back to home again. So there's no 164 minutes that you have to deal with.